Killer Stories, a Jerry Lee Lewis podcast. Stylist, showman and piano pioneer. Hello everyone, welcome back to Killer Stories, where we would dive deep into the wild, wonderful and sometimes troubling world of the man called the Killer, Jerry Lee Lewis. It's been a while since our last episode, but I'm glad you're here, because today we're tackling something a little bit different. Not just the hits and the scandals, but how Jerry influenced other musicians and how he himself was influenced. The influences on Jerry. Jerry often said there were only 4 true stylists in American music. Himself, Hank Williams, Al Jolson and Jimmy Rogers. From his childhood in Faraday, Louisiana, he heard country, gospel, blues and vaudeville-style performances. He recalled of Al Jolson, "When I was about 12, I walked into a theatre. Before the picture went on, they played a record. That record hit me so hard, I rushed out, ran all the way home, sat down at the piano and tried to sing Down Amongst the Sheltering Pines, exactly as Al Jolson had done it." He also absorbed the records of Hank Williams and Jimmy Rogers via his father's collection. And he wasn't blind to the influence of black blues and R&B musicians. One account states, like Elvis and other early rock singers, Lewis was strongly influenced by African American blues musicians. Jerry would hide in the local blues club to hear those artists' music at night. On top of that, there's the lore of Jerry sneaking into Haney's Big House, a club in his home region, and listening to a young B.B. King, Ray Charles or Booker T. Laurie, absorbing that energy, that raw piano blues inflected fire. What does that mean practically? It means Jerry's style was a mashup of southern country stylistic storytelling, Hank Williams, vaudeville, Al Jolson, early hillbilly blues, Jimmy Rogers, and the raw one-take expressiveness of the blues clubs. Into that he injected his own wild piano showmanship. By 1957, Jerry was exploding onto the scene. His version of Whole Lotta Shakin' Going On hit the charts and turned Jerry Lee Lewis into a star. That same year or soon after came Great Balls of Fire, one of the signature tunes that sealed his reputation. His big break was not just the big hit records, but the sheer theatre. Jumping on the piano bench, pounding the keys with his hands, feet, sliding, making the piano the centre of action rather than a backing instrument. When we talk about the evolution of modern music, rock, country, pop, even soul, it's easy to forget just how radical Jerry Lee Lewis really was. Before the Killer came roaring onto the stage in 1957, the piano was mostly background. Something that accompanied singers or kept time for dancers. But Jerry Lee didn't just play the piano, he attacked it. He demanded that it be the star of the show. With one boot on the keyboard, his hair flying and his voice somewhere between a gospel shout and a blues growl, Jerry Lee Lewis made the piano dangerous. He made it sexy, and in doing so he changed the way people thought about what rock and roll could look like and sound like. His arrival didn't just launch hits like Whole Lotta Shakin' Going On and Great Balls of Fire, it launched a whole new attitude. He broke the polite mould of country and pop, bringing the raw, gospel-infused energy of the South into the mainstream. He blurred the lines between black and white music, between sacred and sinful. And this friction, that constant tug-of-war between Sunday morning and Saturday night, became one of the core tensions of rock music forever. Listen to the lineage that followed him. Without Jerry Lee Lewis, there's no Elton John pounding the keys with rhinestone fury. There's no Billy Joel standing on the piano mid-solo. And there's no Leon Russell blending gospel fire with rock swagger. Elton John once said, "Without Jerry Lee Lewis, I wouldn't have become who I am today. He pulverised the piano." Neil Young called him one of the seminal forces, no predictable white chops like Jerry Lee. And Bruce Springsteen said it best, the man doesn't play rock and roll, he is rock and roll. Jerry's influence stretched way beyond pianists too. His unfiltered energy inspired everyone from the Beatles to AC/DC. He showed that music didn't have to be clean, it had to be real. He didn't care about rules, tempo or restraint. He cared about feeling, and that feeling infected everything that came after him. Even decades later, you can hear him in every artist who uses the piano as a weapon, from Ben Folds to Lady Gaga. Every time someone hammers out a rock chorus or climbs on the piano mid-song, Jerry's ghost is right there in the spotlight, grinning that wild grin. In a single chaotic burst of energy, Jerry Lee Lewis took an old instrument and gave it a brand new purpose, not to accompany, but to dominate. He didn't just play rock and roll, he rewired the industry around it. Before Jerry Lee Lewis, the piano played the music. After Jerry Lee Lewis, the piano was the music. One of the most fascinating things about Jerry Lee Lewis was that you never really knew what you were going to get. You could see him play the same song 100 times and it would never sound the same twice. He didn't follow arrangements, he didn't follow rules, he followed instinct. On one night, a whole lot of shaking might sound like pure sweaty rock and roll chaos, pounding keys, driving rhythm, the piano half destroyed by the end of it. But the next night, he'd play it like a slow blues shuffle, almost teasing the crowd, pulling them in before blowing the roof off again. That was Jerry, unpredictable, restless, always chasing the next spark. Kenny Lovelace, his longtime guitar player, band leader, and one of the few men that could actually keep up with him, once said, "Jerry never played a song the same twice. You never knew what he was going to do, and neither did he. You just had to hang on and follow him wherever he went." And that right there is the key to understanding the man. Jerry Lee Lewis wasn't just a performer, he was a channel. He could slip between styles without even thinking about it. Gospel one minute, boogie woogie the next, then a country ballad that could break your heart. And in between, a little blues, a little jazz, even some classical flourishes just to show that he could. He grew up on Hank Williams, Al Johnson and Jimmy Rogers, and he'd often say that they and him were the only stylists in American music. But unlike most musicians, he didn't choose a style, he absorbed them all. He was country when he felt it, rock and roll when the fire hit, gospel when the spirit moved. When Jerry sat at the piano, the past, present and future of American music all seemed to collide, right there under his fingertips. It was as if he were possessed by the music itself, bending and twisting it until it became something entirely new, entirely him. That's why no recording ever quite captured what he could do live. A Jerry Lee Lewis show wasn't a performance, it was an event, a living, breathing thing that changed shape every time it happened. You didn't just hear Jerry Lee play, you experienced him. And in that way, his unpredictability wasn't chaos, it was genius. Because Jerry knew something most musicians never figure out. That's that magic isn't perfection, it's in the moment. To really understand Jerry Lee Lewis, you've got to get under the hood, down to the keys, the phrasing, the rhythm, and the unmistakable left hand. Jerry didn't play piano like anyone before him. He didn't approach it as an accompanist. He treated it like a full band instrument. He was the rhythm section, the melody, and the fire all at once. Listen closely to those early Sun Records sessions. Whole lot of shaking going on, breathless, High School Confidential. You'll hear his left hand doing what no guitarist at the time could. That relentless, driving boogie pattern, hammering octaves like a freight train. It's not polite, it's not clean, it's alive. He kept the rhythm so strong you could pull the drums and bass out entirely and still feel the groove. Now, the right hand, that's where the magic and the mischief lived. Jerry would roll triplets, stab at clusters, and then suddenly break into a honky-tonk run that sounded half Memphis juke joint, half Pentecostal tent revival. He mixed country phrasing with gospel shout, black rhythm and blues with white southern swagger, and somehow made it all sound natural. Chris Christopherson once said, Jerry Lee Lewis was the first great rock and roll pianist, and he made the piano a lead instrument. He made it dangerous. You can hear exactly what he means. Where most pianists sat behind the band, Jerry was in front of them, pounding the keys hard enough to make the strings rattle inside the frame, and he knew what that did sound to people. Billy Joel talked about this too. He said, what I loved about Jerry Lee Lewis was that he attacked the piano. He didn't play it, he beat it into submission. But that attack wasn't random. It came from total control. Watch any live clip. Jerry Lee's wrists are loose, his fingers curved just right, his timing impeccable even when it sounds like chaos. He could stop on a dime, then jump keys with the precision of a classical player, and that's no accident. Jerry had formal training, even if he didn't care to admit it. He grew up playing hymns, learning scales, soaking everything up from Hank Williams to boogie-woogie pianists like Albert Ammons and Pete Johnson. But what made him different was the attitude. He once said, you can't play rock and roll on the piano if you're scared of it. That's pure Jerry Lee. The belief that music wasn't about technique, it was about domination. Little Richard called him the greatest piano player in the world. Chuck Berry said nobody could follow Jerry Lee on stage, not even Elvis. And Ray Charles, who understood feel better than anyone, said, that boy's got church in one hand and the devil in the other. That's the perfect description, isn't it? Because Jerry Lee's piano style lived in that exact tension between heaven and hell, salvation and sin. He'd start a phrase like a gospel revival and end it like a bathroom brawl. He could go from sweet country waltzing to pure rock chaos in a single verse, yet somehow make both sound authentic. That was his secret. He played truthfully. He didn't play to impress. He played because he had to. If you've ever sat at a piano yourself, you know exactly what that feels like. That moment when you stop thinking and start testifying. That's where Jerry Lee Lewis lived. Not in sheet music, not in structure, but in that raw electric space between control and madness. That's what set him apart. That's what made him the killer. You know, most people remember Jerry Lee Lewis for the fire, the wild rock and roll maniac who could set a piano and stage on fire in the same night. But what a lot of folks forget is that underneath all that thunder, there was also heart. And when he sat down to play a country song or a ballad, the same hands that could tear the roof off could just as easily break your heart. His country style was rooted in that Louisiana drawl and the honky-tonk tradition he grew up with. But Jerry Lee's country wasn't slick or polished. It was raw, soulful and lived in. When he played a ballad like You Win Again or What's Made Milwaukee Famous Has Made a Loser Out of Me, you could feel every scar, every late night, every heartbreak. His left hand still carried that strong rhythm, but softer now, more like a heartbeat than a freight train. You'll notice he used a lot of suspended chords and passing tones, letting the notes hang in the air just a little too long. That was Jerry's genius. He let silence speak. He'd lean into a phrase, let it breathe, then slide into the next line like a sigh. Jerry Reed, who at one point in his career was a studio musician with Jerry Lee, once said, when Jerry played country, he played it like he meant every word. He could make you believe it was happening to him right then. And that's true. Jerry never interpreted a song. He inhabited it. He didn't sing She Even Woke Me Up to Say Goodbye. He lived it right there in front of you. Kenny Lovelady talked about this side of him too. He said, Jerry Lee could make a ballad cry. He'd go from tearing the keys up 1 minute to barely touching them the next. You'd look around and the whole room would be dead quiet. When he turned to country full-time in the late 60s, people thought he'd mellowed out, but that wasn't it. He hadn't softened, he'd deepened. All the passion, all the rebellion that used to come out in wild rock and roll shows, it was still there. It just came out now in phasing, in touch, in restraint. Listen to his version of On the Back Row or Another Place, Another Time. That's not Jerry Lee from 1957 pounding the piano with his boot. That's a man who's lived thousands of miles of music and is telling you the story quietly. The rhythm is still pulsating underneath, but he's not showing off anymore. He's testifying. He once said, a good country song is like a confession. You can't fake it, and he never did. Even his gospel roots found their way into his country playing. Those rolling chords, those little grace notes, the gentle tremolo that sounded like a prayer more than a riff. He carried church with him everywhere he went, even into the honky-tonks. That's what made his country and ballads so powerful, because when Jerry played softly, it didn't feel like he'd lost the fire. It felt like he'd finally learned how to control it. And in those quiet moments, when his voice dropped low and his fingers barely touched the keys, you could hear something you didn't always catch in the chaos. The soul of a man who had been to hell and back, and somehow still believed in redemption. Before we sign off, I want to point you towards a resource that takes everything we've talked about today, and then some, and offers a real deep dive into the music of Jerry Lee Lewis. A book titled The Piano Genius of Jerry Lee Lewis by Chris Davis and Daniel Trussett Rossing. This one is for the musician, the historian, the curious fan, anyone who wants to go beyond the myths and look at the piano, the phrasing, the studio takes, the shifts in style that made Lewis unique. And for you as the podcast listener, it's a chance to go deeper. If you love our segment on how we switch styles or how he redefined the piano in rock, this book will fill in the gaps and give you colour and detail. So if you're heading to the bookshelf, your next flight, or just digging into your listening queue, pick up The Piano Genius of Jerry Lee Lewis. Use it alongside your favourite records. Compare the takes. Listen for the left-hand patterns, hear the gospel in his ballads, and the boogie-woogie in his rock and roll. You'll come away hearing things you never noticed before. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Killer Stories. I hope today's deep dive into Jerry Lee's influences, his style, his impact, and now our recommended reading, has given you a new lens which through to listen. Until next time, keep your eyes open, your piano or whatever instrument you play, ready, and remember, the fingerprint of Jerry Lee Lewis is all over modern music. Play it loud.